we're off. Which is good. Okay. Yay. Yeah. Good. There's a good number of people here for this.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, this is good. Yeah. Good. Okay. All right. Yeah, depending on who you get up here with.
Okay, we are going to begin. So, welcome everyone. And we have a strong tradition of bringing great people to this study session to help us think about what is happening around us. And now we have R.T. Rybeck. And he needs no introduction at all because we all know and love him. He could hardly get in the room with the people who wanted to talk and reminisce and hug. He is the, as we know, he was the mayor of Minneapolis and is currently the president of the Minneapolis Foundation. And that's really what we want to talk about. The foundation is truly connected to social impacts in our city and all around, things that none of us know are happening, that are real, or maybe not none of us, but many of us don't know it's happening, and we really should know all the things that are happening in the city and in our state, and the foundation really has the inner workings of things. So it's part of what we hope, and maybe we can come up, as RT and I spoke on the phone, with a possibility of what our downtown congregations can get involved in. We're looking for a project, and I think it would be really powerful if the two of us come up with it, and then I have to sell it to the rest. But that might not be so easy. But you'll sell it. You'll sell it. Oh, okay, good. So if you can't see us, you just please move. Sorry, because there definitely is sightline problems here with the beam that are, but no, they're so lovely to see. So don't hesitate to move if you need to. So I don't know if you want to begin with anything or you want me to start asking questions.
Yeah, why don't if I could just take a couple minutes. Let's see, Pam Marcus's bat mitzvah in 1962, maybe, was the first time I was in this. She was my neighbor. But I've been in this, not up here, by the way, almost always out there. But it's such an important room. And it's such a truly sacred place, religiously, spiritually, and civically. And I think that's a really important point. So I just want to thank you. I also want to say there's a little bit of sweat down the back of my neck because I've been here before and I know how smart this audience is. So I am more than comfortable being put to the test, but it's really, really just great to be here. The one thing I just wanted to open up with before we do this is, you know that line about genius is being able to hold two completely contradictory ideas in your head at the same time? I may butcher it or something, but let's pretend that's the same.
No, but I should have had that last night for my sermon. Okay.
I know, that would have been great.
That would have been perfect. I don't know that.
Because, you know, stop and think about the question, how are you? Like, how do you answer that these days? You know, in my case, we have two new grandchildren, our son and a son, daughter and a daughter. They came almost like a litter at once. It's wonderful. Everything is great. My wife's babysitting 3 blocks away. What could be better? And the world, right? And so I do think one of the things, and I can touch on this in it, is hope does matter, not blind hope, okay? That's ignoring the huge issues in front of us. But I do want to spend some time, and that's why I really appreciated the invitation, focused on those things that we can really surround ourselves with that buttress us in this moment. So I'm looking forward to doing that.
Perfect. So I guess the real question is, you have lived in Minneapolis your entire life. That is true. That is a true statement. And spent 12 years as the city's mayor. That, I think, you think being the senior rabbi of Temple Israel is hard? Being the mayor of Minneapolis is a very hard job. And I just was wondering how you would describe the spiritual and emotional state of our city today.
Well,
Should I have started with, how are you?
Well, can I first say that you talked about the mayor's job is hard. I think actually yours is harder, and I was joking with the mayor on the way out. I said, you're a brave guy, because when I was mayor, when I came here or went to Westminster or Plymouth or St. Mark's, I couldn't get out of the place because everybody had a parking issue or something else like that. More important, this is a place where people have a lot of really great thoughts and opinions. How am I today? I'm holding that genius moment of both things, but the city, I believe, is in the middle of what is a narrative hangover from George Floyd's murder that wound up polarizing folks in a very difficult way. And I do think we need to just stop and reset and take a breath and recognize this community went through two twin traumas at once, up against a whole lot of other things. And in that moment, we can look at the fact that there was great destruction in this community. We can look on the fact that ideologically people polarized even within the city in a huge way. I also want us to hold up the fact that in that moment, there were thousands of people who came out that morning to clean up what happened. There was a $50 million fund that we put together at the Minneapolis Foundation with money we raised in the private sector and the public sector to walk up and down Lake Street, West Broadway, and others. It was also the moment when we said, and we had called our fund the Restore, Rebuild, Reimagine Fund. We restored and rebuilt. When Tanya Allen came into the McKnight Foundation, I said, you got to do Reimagine. She came up with this idea of the Groundbreak Initiative, which I was working on just a lot this week, where we've now gotten banks and foundations and government at the table, mobilized $1 billion in capital to look at Black home ownership and business starts. I look at the Minneapolis Foundation, which 8 years ago had fund holders who put out $40 million a year. We now put out $120 million a year, and we're going to have a record year also. So how is the state of the city? I think we have a tremendous lack of confidence right now. And the only thing I miss about being mayor is the ability to control the narrative, because I just want us to look in the mirror and say, this is one of the great cities in the country that has looked in the eye of extremely difficult things, and we're navigating through some of them, and we're going to get to the other side of others. I'm not a blind optimist. I'm an optimist, but there are reasons to feel better about it. I want to address the confidence issue and our belief gap in our ability to do big things.
So, you don't only think of George Floyd, but you think of the murder of the Hortmans and the trauma of the Hoffmans and the shooting at Annunciation. And I really feel like we have a front row seat to something that is happening, and we have the opportunity to really do something about it and to be there. And I think it's not only the confidence in the city, but it's our own confidence to kind of do things, right? And so I'm just wondering, what are some of the things, when we spoke, you said that the religious community was your best partner when you were mayor. And I'd love for you to unpack that, because that is what we want to be. We really do want to be partners in the civic reality of Minneapolis. That's why we're staying here. That's why Westminster is staying here. That's why the Basilica is staying here. That's why the mosques are staying here. So I'm wondering what that partnership looked like, and maybe for us to kind of muse over some partnerships that could happen in the future.
I just love that, because I run the foundation. I was mayor, but before that I was a reporter. So while it's not my nature, it was my job to sit in the back of the room and listen and watch and see how things work. And during that time, as a kid who grew up wanting to be the mayor of the town, it became clear to me that the mayor of the town was not the person in charge of the town. It's not a political town. Chicago. You go in the airport, the mayor welcomes you in the freeway, and the toilet paper is from the mayor and all of that. This is not that kind of town, right? What it really is it's a civic town. And so when I got in to be mayor, I was totally over my head on most of the big issues. There's a lot to learn. It was complicated. I hadn't been in office. And I recognized that I couldn't solve a single issue inside City Hall. So the first partners I thought I would find would be philanthropy and business. And I kind of worked that muscle a little bit, but you are absolutely right. You, Spencer Simmerl at St. Mark's, Tim Hart Anderson, I mean, I think go on and on about this group, and my own minister from this little tiny church in Linden Hills, Marianne Buddy, who is now the Bishop of Washington, D.C., a phenomenal person. She's coming in December to speak. You were the core of almost everything important that I did, the faith communities. And so when you look at the city-county homeless plan, where we laid out 27 different points to act on, and we got every homeless person into the convention center and triaged every single support service. When you look at the youth violence prevention initiative that took a crime wave in 2005, analyzed that it was about youth violence, did a public health early intervention initiative. When you look at the response to the bridge collapse, when you start with the interfaith service that I was sworn in with and the interfaith service when I left, I could go on and on about that. When Faith in the City, where Lutheran organizations came together to really look at South Minneapolis. When you look for hope, I think our faith communities have great opportunity. I think that has frayed a little bit. I think people are also afraid to go there. And at least the expression of my own faith does not happen just in the facility. You know, it's to go out. And I think you and this congregation has proven that over and over and over and over again. And you specifically, Marcy, do I call you Rabbi? Or can I? Okay, sorry, but Rabbi, is that, she's also Marcy, is you were a absolutely central, pivotal part of so much of what I did. And I don't need a title to do that. And you don't need a title to do that, but we need each other to do that, you know? And that's totally doable. Stop looking for a hero. We're the heroes. We can do it, you know? And so I've got about 5 ideas.
You know, that's good. We'll get to those 5 ideas. But when I think of things like the Tilson Project, you know, that is a very interesting project that Eddie Tilson and Archie Gibbons Sr. put together, because there was redlining after World War II. And they didn't just, you know, say, oh no, this is horrible. They actually financed a project that the houses around the cemetery, around Temple Israel Cemetery, were capped at a certain price point so that the Black community had access to housing and to really generational income, right? Which is one of the biggest ways that we pass along wealth, is from property, is from owning our own home. And so we were going to, the reason I know mostly about this was in the 60s, was that we were going to expand our cemetery. And we came up upon Tilson Homes, and we were like, oh, we are not expanding our cemetery and cutting down these homes for people. Like it, so it was just this awakening where we said, wow, look at these projects of people who really worked together and honed in on something and did it. And it still is true today. They are in the historic trust now. They weren't when we were talking about expanding, which we wouldn't have been able to think about it, which was the right thing. We shouldn't have even thought about it. We didn't know. And so here we have like people who really got together, friends. They were friends, the developers and bankers, and they made it happen. So what can we make happen?
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I don't know if you guys, like if you're going on 42nd Street, going across the freeway to your cemetery, right there are these homes. And I remember when a tornado hit that area. And I also remember door knocking that area a lot. The residents who were part of that, the first Black people who could live in that part of South Minneapolis, are now just finishing and beginning to move out of there. A multi-decade impact on that. Now, this morning, I was at this meeting about the Groundbreak Initiative. There's a bunch of money being mobilized for home ownership, for people who have not had the opportunity. So why would we do that? Why would we give one group money or not? I'll give an example. The J. and Rose Phillips Foundation is an independent foundation, but Dean and the family came to us and asked us to run that for them. So we run that foundation. So I'm technically president of that foundation. Dean and the board lead it. However, one of the projects we worked on with them is their new headquarters in North Minneapolis. And the partner is a guy named Calvin Littlejohn. Calvin is a black guy with a drywall company. Now, Calvin needed working capital. Well, you know, he wouldn't have had to, except for, you ever heard of Black Wall Street, Tulsa? One of the worst racial incidents in the history of this country was when black entrepreneurs who had property had that stolen from them in a horrible racist incident. One of the families was the Littlejohns. Calvin would have been a third-generation real estate person who wouldn't need any money to do that, but because their family was stripped of that, we were able to step in, led by the Phillips Foundation, and play the friends and family role. That's not a gift. That's repairing what has happened in the past. And, well, the past is the past. No, think about it. If we want this whole economy to move forward, all of a sudden now we have this person who's got capital, who's paying taxes, who's able to do others. This is logical kind of work. It's not ideological kind of work. Sorry, I'm off on a...
That's good.
I'm in a pulpit.
So tell us what that
in
project.
A temple.
Tell us what that project is. Actually, what
How
is
is
the what else?
Oh, the groundbreaking. Can I spend a minute or two on that?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. So after George Floyd was murdered, it was a hideous moment, but it was also a moment where there was a lot of generosity. And so sitting where we do at the Minneapolis Foundation, everybody comes to us with ideas and all of that, and it was this uh-oh kind of moment because kind of everything sounded good and nothing seemed big enough, and people were all over the map. Slowly over time, people started to come together and think, okay, what's the core of what we want to get at? Well, we really want to get at the income gap. And the income gap, the way wealth is created in this country is through real estate, commercial or residential. So got the banks to the table and said to the banks, okay, why aren't you doing more loans for people of color? Well, they said the ones we're not doing have high risk. And so philanthropy said, okay, what if we put in some of the money and you took more risk? And then we began to talk about that. And over the past 5 years, an incredible conversation happening nowhere else in the world is actually getting the banks, the philanthropy, government together, really getting into the weeds of how to do those loans. And now these loans are getting out, and $3 million of home loans have already come out. But the way that works is then the banks who had money they wanted to lend, if it wasn't as risky, put it in. So $3 million of philanthropic money leveraged $13 million of private capital to put many black families into homes. That's just because people got together at the table and said, let's lock arms and share the risk. And now that's going to grow really fast. And so there's an opportunity for anyone, including this place, to say, let's take 5 families, let's be the friend and families for them, let's put them into homes, and let's go. And you don't have to do it alone. The whole community's doing it together. That's only one of the ideas, Marcy.
Right. That's a great idea. But it's really what, and it's amazing because we went, some of us, to the Rondo neighborhood to hear the history in the Rondo neighborhood and the project going over 94. I don't know where it's at this point, but it, it just the amazing gratitude and excitement about building, and that I think is what's really important. That will give the confidence back, I think. All right, so what's idea number 2?
Well, let's see. Idea number 2 is about food. And one of the things, Second Harvest is a great organization. They've done really great things, and we have a better ecosystem here than other places. But it was quite interesting when, over the last 6 months, there's another story I'll tell in a second about a big federal grant we got, but we were giving out money for what's called environmental justice. And we expected to get lots of applications for alternative energy and clean water. When we got some of those, but it was remarkable how many people came to us and said, food is really at the center of our environmental justice. Example, tribal community in northern Minnesota doesn't want to get government provisions that they grew up in. They want to eat the food that is part of their culture. So we invested in helping reintroduce bison to that tribal community. A food shelf in Frogtown wants to have fresh produce that is grown right there. And so you begin to see all these double bottom lines. And I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that food is central to all this, but we tend to skip over that a lot. But food systems, and every single word coming out of my mouth is actually being parroted from my wife, who started Homegrown Minneapolis and got me into this idea of really recognizing that food is at the core of this. And then think a little bit more about food, just as a digression. Why are we here? White settlement in this town started because of the waterfall, which was able to bring the logs from northern Minnesota. It was milling. It was, to do that. But then it became the milling capital of the world because there was all this great grains and others being grown around the state. And so rural Minnesota and urban Minnesota were tied together. When food went global and those small mills became General Mills and Pillsbury, created some wealth, but it also disconnected the urban core from greater Minnesota. And so I do think one of the things that we really have to be intentional about right now is that we live in a prosperous urban island in a state that has greater needs outside of the metro area, and that's not unique. That the globalization of the food system is really part of the reason for the urban-rural divide. And then, I'm a little far afield, but I'm going to put one other thing on. If you take that map of where the urban-rural divide is, and then you put on top of it a map of news deserts where the small community newspaper has folded, that's where you see conspiracy theories, that's where you see misinformation, that's when you see resentment against urban cores. So you begin to really think about that more healed. My family helped start New Prague, Minnesota. They had the store, the farmers came to the store, closed system. We need to sort of think about that again. I got a little afield, I'm sorry.
It's very interesting. I wouldn't have thought about the fact that because news has become in our pockets, that there's susceptibility to conspiracy theories when the small town newspaper isn't there anymore. It's very interesting. Well, are we on the fourth project or the third or the fifth project?
I've been a little, well, let me say, let's talk a little bit about the environment. And, I want to introduce you to this great state legislator. He just left the state legislature. He did this incredible environmental work.
Really?
His name is Frank Hornstein. He's a great guy. I know you'll like him. The Minneapolis Foundation, has, we have money we put out.
Put it closer to your mouth.
Okay, how's that? Okay, sorry, I'm sorry, you guys. The Minneapolis Foundation has money we put out, and we put it out in equity and justice and education and economic vitality, but I always wanted to do environment. And then a couple of years ago, we got this amazing opportunity. The federal government put out a huge amount of money for environmental justice, for really helping to protect communities that had really especially suffered environmental degradation. And we applied for it and we got it. It was a $60 million grant to do environmental justice across the Great Lakes. We were so excited. And so we divided 1/3 urban, 1/3 rural, 1/3 tribal. The new administration came in, it froze those funds. I was not happy, no one else was. We sued and we won, and now we have the money back. And now we are granting out $60 million across the Great Lakes for that bison, for that food shelf, for water quality in different places. When you look at environmental justice and you see cities and communities and you look at disparity, There's so much we can do there. There's the food thing I mentioned. There is also the idea of how homes are weatherized and protected. The people paying for the most drafty homes and the least energy efficient are the poorest ones who can least afford high energy costs. There's a ton in this whole environmental justice area. I think you're going to have right down the street a group working on workforce development in the Old West High and thinking about helping some of those people doing that. And think about this for a second on who does the work around here. Just get around town one afternoon. Who's on the roof? Who's mowing the lawn? Who's in the garage? Who's in the back of the kitchen? First up, any home repair that you do, almost any, comes down to the fact that a bunch of people who are probably from South and Central America are doing our work for us, okay? Why is it that we can't do more to get them in business? I happened to run into Alice Mortensen a few hours ago. Her family had Mortensen Development. An immigrant came to this country, and her great father-in-law, I guess, with just tools, started a little home repair business. Mortensen is now one of the most significant developers in the country. That guy on that roof, that woman taking off shingles, that kid out there mowing the lawn for somebody else should have their own business. And with this Groundbreak initiative, we have working capital right there. So taking like a piece of that and addressing entrepreneurship, wouldn't it be wonderful to take a number of people from this congregation and put a few people in business? And I know this congregation, there are a lot of people who know business around here. You know, I think that could help.
So I love these ideas, and thinking about what the downtown congregations have done in the past, the Curry Avenue project. I don't know if you know, there were the Curry Avenue, there is a facility where homeless people would stand out every night in order to get a bed. And it was on Curry Avenue, right? Kind of
in farmers market?
Yeah, by the farmers market, exactly, above the farmers market. Perfect. I was going to say Twin Stadium, but it's a little further. So, and what we found was that there were, or what people came from the Curry Avenue project, came to the downtown clergy and said, we have all these single men in line, and we know there's a federal grant to get caseworkers for single men. Most of them were Vietnam vets who were homeless and traumatized, PTSD, all of that. And but there needs to be, a grant has to be funded halfway by the community, and then the federal dollars would be released, and you could get case managers. So, perfect. We went to the business community, and we put up $35,000, I think, or $30,000, and they put up $70,000, and that matched. I mean, it really was $100,000. It was like not a huge amount of money. We're not talking about the millions and billions. And we funded caseworkers for all the single men at the Curry Avenue project, so that single moms and kids or families could definitely go and get housing. And we housed 100 single men, and they are still in their homes, in their apartments, with wraparound services. And they came back to us for food services, so interesting. And but they sort of found their own way into it. And it's part of what Beacon had did, and what Tim Hart Anderson really did the heavy lifting on that project. So these are the kinds of things we can do, because these are the places we can have impact. So that is.
Well, and you know, one of the things about that is that housing is central to everything. It's also not the only thing we're dealing with homelessness. Right. And when I go around town and I see the real impacts of the fentanyl crisis, it's quite serious. There are multiple other things. And that's why one thing I'd like to bring back, and I touched on earlier, is this Project Homeless Connect. Because what that was really was to recognize that all the different needs of different people who are homeless need to be triaged in different ways. So did a survey of how many homeless people there are. Let's say the number is 1,000, got 1,000 volunteers from faith communities trained to be navigators in a room, the convention center, that had legal advice, housing advice,
It was the best.
haircuts. Remember that
What
photographs?
happened to it?
I don't know. And I would very much put foundation money into that. Let's go out and advocate doing this again, because when you look at that person who you want to help and you wonder, should I give them money at the corner or not, or you see that person who's passed out in a doorway and your heart bleeds and you want to figure out what to do, it's different each time. But when they walked in there, treated with dignity, they were a guest, and we hosted them, and the navigators helped them, connecting the dots. By the way, it's a really good way to save public money, because you're just connecting the dots. And go ahead.
What was it called again?
Project Homeless Connect.
Project Homeless Connect. So we saw a problem as the downtown clergy of people who needed immediate money
Yeah.
because their uncle died in Chicago and they didn't have money for a bus ticket and all of that. So we got money and cash and a checkbook, and we set up shop there, and we gave out money to people who needed it immediately for certain things, and for a funeral, for visiting somebody, whatever it was. And that was where we kind of made our mark in that moment. We were helping to sort of navigate people. We were one of the navigators.
Yeah.
So people could go and get their eyes checked and get glasses that day. They could get into the dentist, because we know that dental problems are your biggest health risk of heart and other very serious medical problems. So you could go to the dentist, you could go to a lawyer. There are lawyers there. You could go get a baby carriage. So pregnant women could come in and get a very beautiful high-end carriage and clothes and shoes. And it was an amazing day, amazing day. And hundreds of people from Temple went and volunteered. It was
we
like
should just
one,
do that. I think
was one
we
day.
should do that
I
one.
think we should do that again. I think that's really
Seriously.
so great. Yeah. I mean, it really, because we found our voice too as a religious community. So that is really good. All right.
Okay, I don't know whether I should tell this story or not.
Go for it.
Okay, so the
We're
only
all
reason I
fired
started
and hungry.
laughing when you said that is that what you did giving cash was fabulous, because it was in the context of being able to do other things.
Yeah.
There was I don't know okay, so Mary Jo Copeland, a wonderful human being, does wonderful things, but at her place, she was giving out cash to people and not connecting the dots or anything. So we wound up having all sorts of things where people would get cash, they'd walk outside, they'd get mugged and this. So we kind of gently went in, the police chief and I went in and said, this is so wonderful, you're doing this is so great, and began to explain it. And she stood up and she said, you take me on, you're taking on God. And so I shouldn't be telling this story, but it was one of those things that there's a right way to do it and there's another way to do it.
Yeah. I think we were actually
Don't tell that story.
We were buying bus tickets, and we were calling and giving them credit cards to buy the
Yes,
bus
you did,
tickets and those kinds of things. So it really was done. Yeah, that's good. That's important. That's important. So I really feel like the north side. Let's talk about the north side, because I think we've been talking about the south side. Yeah. And Elijah McDavid is really one of my favorite people at Fellowship. And I know that, I'm wondering what's happening up there in your work.
A tremendous amount is happening in North Minneapolis. Great need. Also, really some good things happening. Honestly, if somebody said to me, you have $1 million to spend north or south, I would probably spend it south right now. I would spend it ideally in both places if I had $2 million. But North Minneapolis is a place that I think right now has a lot of good momentum going around an overall big plan. There are also a series of capital campaigns for really good things. I'm really excited about what's happening at the playground, the Northside Park right outside of North High, where there's a huge effort to do field house and really have great recreation. A great swimming facility has been built there. There's a lot of different effort going. I think the real effort there that's making the most sense is to figure out, again, going back to entrepreneurship, what's really a good way to create more wealth. So much of the work in North Minneapolis was mitigating poverty, which is really important, like we're talking with homelessness. But creating wealth is a very different thing, and we conflate the two. So the ability of an entrepreneur who has one apartment building getting a second is huge, or one house and a second is huge. An example of that, and it does go back to food, the Capri Theater, and right next to it, Neon, a great nonprofit developer, is doing a food incubator where people who have catering businesses, for instance, can get their business started. And I had an experience way back when the tornado hit North Minneapolis that helped me understand that a bit. We're standing in the middle of Farview Park. The tornado has hit North Minneapolis. Nobody's refrigerator is working, so everybody's food is rotting. There's hunger. There's all these issues. And this woman is sobbing, and I said, "What's wrong?" knowing something was, and she said, "I have a catering business. My kitchen now has a tree in it, and I'm not going to be able to do my biggest project of the year. I'm going to lose my house, and my mother is going to lose my house." Well, at that time, and Stu Ackerberg, who I think is still part of this congregation, or maybe not, I don't know, but Stu was pretty central to doing some work in North Minneapolis, and it helped with this community kitchen, and we got her into the community kitchen. Now imagine it's not an emergency, and imagine that you have a really good salsa or a really good any kind of food-related business. You don't want to have them build a whole kitchen. You can go right in there now and bring that up to scale. So that's a really good program there. So a lot of good stuff's happening in North Minneapolis. There's also an effort, Centauri is a development right behind the 927 West Broadway that we did. That's market rate housing. And so again, it's not trying to move toward overconcentration of poverty, but try to be able to build enough middle income wealth in without displacement. And I think there's some really good stories coming out of that.
Great. Good. Well, I don't know. I know there have been questions that have come up from the people who are here. Do we
This
have...
gentleman right behind Sandy was going to ask me a question.
Rachel.
Hey, Sandy, how are you?
Some questions. Thank you. All right. What do Minnesotans need most right now from our elected officials and leaders? And do you have any plans to seek public office again?
I've always, I'll get rid of the last one for a second. I've always done civic work. So I was mayor, and I was a reporter, and I ran an education equity group, and I run the Community Foundation, which will almost certainly be my last job, and I'm not leaving soon. So I'm very political, but I really think people my age should get the heck out of the way, and let new leaders come in. So no, I'm not going to run for anything. That doesn't mean that I'm out of politics. I think more important, what political leaders need right now is the maturity to figure out a way to cross boundaries. I think that's ungodly difficult nationally and all of that. I do think we need more of that in this city. And there are so many threats from outside this city that it's deeply disturbing to me to see a city hall with good people in it who are seeming to not figure out how to bring it all together. And to me, that's the biggest single issue in the city for political leadership. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I was proud of the fact that every single council member I worked with voted with me on a big issue and against me on a big issue. That was good. That's what it means to have back and forth dialogue. I do not put my experience up against people there now. It's a very difficult and different period of time now, but at a certain point, you've got to be the grown-up in the room, and you've got to figure out how to look at somebody and say, I disagree with 99.9%. What is that 0.1%? And figure out how to do that. And we are desperate for that right now. That doesn't mean ignoring some hideous things going on right now. It does mean to get stuff done. And that should be easier in a city than in a country, but I'd like to see more of it.
Yeah. Something, I think the murder of George Floyd and all happened is a lot about not trusting institutions. It was focused on the police, but the police is just one example of so many institutions and organizations that have been sort of, is it in the 22nd century that we just have to shake up new institutions? Is that what's happening? Is it a destruction of what is in order to build something new, or is it destruction for destruction's sake?
This is a really good question about, do you want to take it to institutions broadly? Because I have a thought on that. I want you to visualize a ship going through the ocean, a big, powerful ship going through the ocean, and suddenly it gets stuck on a reef. And everybody on it runs over to this side to try to shake it off the reef. And then they run over to that side to try to shake it off the reef. And they're running from one side to the other. And finally, they're off the reef. But they're going in the wrong direction. I will say that's kind of how I feel where the country is today. That this big ship that we have began moving through the ocean, but we finally got stuck. I consider that coming to the end of an era. I'm not happy about the direction it's going. I'm trying not to be political here, but this ain't what I would want to see happen. But we're not on the rock. And so I think what's interesting about that and the opportunity in that is to look at it and say, okay, we're now getting the civics lesson we should have been teaching in high school all these years. We're zero-basing everything. Yeah. I was at a thing earlier about public media. I happen to believe deeply in that. We have to ask the question, why is there public media? Why is there? Okay, fair enough. Let's rethink some of these things. Not everything in this world before was perfect at all. And so the opportunity to have really bad things happen because we're unstuck is bigger. The opportunity to have really big things that are good happen is bigger too. So I think we need to do this weird thing of play defense while playing offense. What do we want the world to be? It's honestly easier to ask that question than it was a few years ago because we're questioning everything. Wow, is that complicated when, Beverly Fitzgerald, you were talking about picking up the paper and what it's like to pick up the paper in the morning. Oh my God, But what's happening is if we recognize that we won't always have the ideology and anger of the moment, that we move into a period of time where people will rethink a lot. I think that's a great thing. Jefferson did the thing about we need a revolution every 20 years. I don't think he was necessarily envisioning this, but we need to get unstuck every once in a while and ask some basic questions. And so I'm trying to figure out what 2, 3, 7 years down the road, what are the questions we want to be asking now to create a better future. It's easier to do that now than before. That's really optimistic way of looking at a very tough moment.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that, the downtown clergy meet every month for breakfast. And one of the things that has come up, which I thought was just really an interesting insight, is everyone's bemoaning downtown, how dangerous it is. And, you go, it feels like a ghost town sometimes. But if you go a mile and a half either way, it is bustling. And one of my colleagues said, I guess Northeast Minneapolis and Luke didn't get the memo that it's dangerous in downtown Minneapolis. So why are we getting ourselves into our own I feel like sometimes we are our own worst enemies, never missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity. So what is it going to be to build up downtown again, and what is it going to take?
Well, bingo. So I'm downtown. I work in the IDS. I'm downtown every day. The narrative and the reality are very, very different. But there has been a big change. My dad ran Walgreens in 9th and Nicollet when I was a little kid. And during that time, and then the next decade, was seen as a real glory time. But when I was at the Downtown Council, one of my 57 careers, back in, say, the early 80s, I'm standing at the top of the IDS with somebody from outside of town, and I walk proudly to the window and say, "Here's downtown." And he looks over toward the Metrodome, and there are a bunch of parking lots with this weird pumpkin thing that we played football and baseball in, and the railroad tracks and the empty lots are on the river, and he looks at the North Loop with all these abandoned warehouses, and he turns to me and he says, "Where is it?" And I'm like, I was crushed, because here's this great downtown. Well, the great downtown in the good old days, from somebody with a good memory who was a reporter covering it, was 6 vital blocks surrounded by not a whole lot. So now what's interestingly happened is that if you surround that at just a few blocks, you have a series of very active live, work, play neighborhoods where they've evolved into a different thing. And so what you really think now is the villages of downtown. It's not just the central core, which, by the way, has some good stuff happening, and. In addition to that, when I was living about 8 blocks that way in Uptown, Uptown was the only game in town. Who would have thought 38th and Nicollet would be a fabulous restaurant location, or certainly Northeast or North Loop or something? Go to any commercial corridor in this town. Go to 46th and Grand, patisserie and all this. So what's happening is that we are weaving the city back together. A city is live, work, play, and for a while we got really sort of linear. This is where we go to the office, this is where we live, this is where we play. I don't want to live like that. I want to live with all of that together, and that's especially true with hybrid work and all of this. The downtown itself, a bunch of good stuff is happening, but I want you to experience downtown this winter, because it's going to be incredibly great. The Dayton's Holiday Market did $2 million of business last year. It's demonstrated how great retail can be. It's going to be bigger. We're going to, the Great Northern Festival is going to be on the riverfront in early February. We're doing a big promotion over there called Winterapolis. It's going to kick off on the evening of Black Friday, where we're going to light up the IDS tree. We're going to light up the lights, have all of them go on in the city at once, and kick off a great period of time. The orchestra is having the Nordic Festival. All of this stuff will be much more like, did anybody go to Dinner du Nord out of the hands? Anybody? 2,000 people eating dinner together. We're going to do more of that kind of thing. Live, work, play neighborhoods, So I'm not
So that's hopeful. That's hopeful. So you're saying it just got spread out, and there are pockets.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying spread out and chill out.
Yeah.
Look at what we have. It's a different reality, and that's okay.
Yeah. I like it. So this goes into the COVID pandemic. And I think our country has really been moving since 9/11. I think. Yes. That really is the beginning of this really fearful leadership, so I think anyway. The COVID pandemic changed our workforce, with many individuals working primarily from home. To what degree do you think economic revitalization, looked like an N, revitalization depends on a return to the office? Well, Target just said everyone has to come back.
Yeah, it's a great question. Work has changed now on how that worked, but not anywhere nearly as much as it was a couple of years ago. Many employers, U.S. Bank was the first to say you're coming to the office. Target's now, more and more of that is happening, but it won't be the same, and that's okay. Like, our team is in the office about 4 days a week, and we are cool with that, and it's so obviously if you don't have as many people working there, it's a problem. The biggest problem is actually on the property taxes of the city, that the downtown office towers carried a wildly disproportionate amount of the tax burden for the city. So that matters. But could I also go back to that point you made about, and I think it's a great one, about what happened with 9/11 and COVID and all of that. I think the smartest thing that's ever been said in politics was when Franklin Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Mm-hmm. When you make decisions about your political life or your civic life or your personal life based on fear, you contract. And we know this a lot about the way people's brains work. Like executive function is what, you know, when you do a book report in school, why do you do a book report? The teacher gives that to you because it's about being able to plan long term, to say, I'm going to do this week and this, that. And it develops what called in education executive function. And that's what allows us to look down the road. If, however, if you're in the woods and the woods are beautiful, you can think big thoughts. But if you think there's a bear in the woods, all of a sudden you're not thinking big thoughts. So apply all of that to our life and apply it to the need we have to look down, to plan for the future, to believe that you can invest in something because something will be there, to believe in a friendship because you know they'll be there. When all of that shuts down, fear becomes the motivator, and people's perceptions of crime. There's real crime, but there also the perception is way higher than it has ever been compared to the reality. But more important, just our belief in all that. So if I could ask you to do one thing, aside from all these great things, say hello to people. I know that seems weird, but I mean, think about this. We were trained to be afraid of the stranger approaching us. So I do all sorts, like in the elevator, I'm the guy who turns around and says hi to everybody, and it kind of seems weird. But that idea of just looking at other people and saying hi is a radical act these days. And it's a sense that I have confidence that you will not be a threat to me. That may seem strange, but I do think that's at the core of a lot of stuff right now.
Well, I also want to say that having security training, it's the best security measure.
Yeah.
Because people who can move in and out of communities without being noticed or talked to are the ones that come back and do dangerous things. So that is true. That is what I've been taught, and that is what I believe. Okay, so Minneapolis Public Schools. Yeah. All right. My daughter is a 7th grade social studies teacher at Justice Page Middle School. A great place. It is amazing. It really is sort of like the Barton of today. That was my little, like this little kind of place that the teachers love each other. They all are there for the right reasons. They have 150 kids through the day, and I asked Naomi after the first week, do you know the names of your kids? I can't imagine. She goes, of course I do. Mom, they're my students. Like, how dare you assume that I wouldn't? So tell us about public school education. We see people fleeing. Is that true? What do we need to, the resources aren't there?
Let me start with the good stuff and then come to the bad stuff.
Go for it.
Why is Justice Page a really good school? A whole lot of reasons, but one of them is back in 2010, superintendent came to me. I had nothing to do with this, by the way. Superintendent came to me and said, I'm going to have to make a really tough decision. Washburn High School is not working, and I'm going to have to fresh start Washburn. I thought, fresh start, that sounds nice. I said, what is a fresh start? She said, well, we're going to have to basically ask every person to reapply for their position and redraw the curriculum. And I'm like, oh my God. So she asked me to go out and help meet with some neighbors. And so I went out and we had a few things like that. But go to Washburn High School today. Washburn High School is a dramatically better high school. And because of that, parents, let's go back to confidence again, parents who look at their kids' education now see Justice Page, the feeder school for that, as being a really good viable option, which in turn makes Washburn better, which in turn makes other schools better. That's a good way for it to work, but it took guts. connect that to the fact that there have to be some very difficult decisions made to do a couple things. Number one, the biggest loss of students that is most impactful on the quality and the closing of schools is the loss of Black families, especially in North Minneapolis. And so the ability to solve that is complicated. One of the ways it was suggested to do that was to actually deconcentrate poverty that was in the schools in North Minneapolis, and the line that was drawn was in Kenwood. So that's proved to be a very tough concept. If I could do anything on that, this would create a bit of a furor, but I would take the parking lot next to Dunwoody. I would build a new Central High School. In the morning, you would go to Central High School. In the afternoon, you would choose to either go to Minneapolis College for getting your 2-year degree, or to Dunwoody and getting your vocational degree, and graduate from high school with both a high school degree and a certification in plumbing and electricity, or 2 years you can apply to a 4-year college. That would be something that would attract people from other places, but doing that would require closing North High. My God, that would be difficult. It would require people looking at connecting all these boundaries. It is time to do that kind of stuff. It was time to do that 25, 30 years ago. Why isn't it happening? How many people, you don't have to raise your hands, how many of these people, you people who lived in Minneapolis or any other place, were deeply aware of who ran for your school board and monitored exactly what's going on every couple of weeks? The school board members, bless your heart, thank you. And I'm not going to embarrass all of us by asking more, but you know, we pick school board members by going into political conventions where people have to spend 27 hours and don't get much done and all of that. It's time to re-engage in all of that. And very little of that is being discussed in the current city elections. They, on paper, have nothing to do with it. In reality, they have a lot to do with it. So I would say one other element of that is the Star Tribune, which is doing really good things, doesn't have anybody covering Minneapolis public schools right now that I know of. I may be making a mistake. Allison, you can correct me on this. Where's Allison? Somewhere. Okay, she's going to get really mad at me, but I think that's true. And they're stretched. They're trying to be statewide, NPR and all that. Who's covering schools? How do you know what's going on? I work at this stuff, and I can barely figure out what's going on. So shedding some light on those decisions is part of it. All that being said, man, there's some good teachers doing really good things.
Amazing, amazing teachers who really are so gifted and really want to teach their students. Yeah. And it's hard. Students are going through a lot too. So which of the Minneapolis Foundation's accomplishments are you the most proud?
Which of the Minneapolis Foundation's accomplishments am I most proud of? I am a whole lot, but I would say the biggest thing we hold up is to be a community of generosity, meaning that you have advisors to make the money, we're the advisors to give it away. So we have these trusted one-on-one relationships, but we've shifted that into people coming together. So we had this dinner for 8 people. We went to this restaurant in North Minneapolis, invited 8 different people who were fund holders who had all come to us and said, why did we get rid of vocational high school? Why don't we teach kids electricity and plumbing and all that? So we all got there. They were all strangers. So one of the people began describing what program she funded that was about taking kids in high school and teaching them how to be electricians. And the person across the table, another one of our fund holders, who was a stranger to the first one, said, I funded that the second year. And then another person across the table said, I funded it the third year. And so here we had these 3 people and put them together, and 1 + 1 + 1 is 4. And so that's what we do now. So we do all these convenings. We're doing a big one next week on how Minnesotans get information. We're doing climate things. So there are individual grants that we've done that I love. But what I really like is that we really recognize that if we bring people together to be a community of generosity, we can be a generous community in the middle of this generous community and just get huge things done.
Great. So, while the Minneapolis Foundation doesn't have much to do with the rise in crime, there is a preventative piece that you can be a part of. And so many are concerned about the rise in crime. And so in substance abuse and, you know, all that's happening, we all have heard stories of something happening in, again, communities that hadn't experienced it before. So what can be done to improve public safety, do you think?
Crime is a serious issue. It would probably not be accurate to say it's rising. It's a mixed picture right now. I think a couple things. Number one, I would say the current chief we have is as good a chief as we've ever had. Tim Dolan, I think, would be the other one I would say, but I think our current chief rises above many others. I do think one of the things that I'd like to see more of is to analyze the problem and go upstream. I think I mentioned that youth violence prevention initiative we had, and it was so helpful because Ellen Luger, who just left, and she's heard me talk way too many times and left, helped lead this. She was at the General Mills Foundation when I was mayor, and she and Karen Kelly-Arwula, the Minneapolis Foundation, helped do this youth violence prevention initiative. So here we are in the middle of a crime wave, and I'm talking about these fuzzy things like early intervention and all, and people were like, more cops on the street. Well, we put more cops on the street, but what we really recognize is if you go way upstream and you look at that point, the driver was youth violence, and it sort of is today. What is the first sign of at-risk behavior? Go way upstream, and it was curfew and truancy. Those were real good indicators. So we set up a curfew truancy center in City Hall. When someone is picked up for being out of school or for being out late, we asked why, got them support services. Then we looked at the second, so every young person surrounded by a trusted adult, intervene at the first sign of at-risk behavior. Then there are some kids who need much more intervention, so rejuvenate them, but never throw a kid away. So we divided these 4 buckets, had like 30 different initiatives, executed against them all. In that curfew truancy center, about 80% of the kids who came there never came back, which meant it was a success. And crime went down dramatically. So people's response is more cops on the street, and I get it, and it's true, but unless we recognize that we get at the root system, and there's ways to do that, and our Youth Violence Prevention Initiative was a model for the country, so that's one that I think we could, that's another thing we could work on.
That's another thing we could work on. I like it. Yeah, that is really important. Makram El-Amin always says that, you know, in North Minneapolis, in the Black community, you know, children at a certain age have the brightest eyes and all of that, and then at some point, there's no light in those eyes anymore, and there's a lot of worry.
Even take that into out-of-school activities. I was a coach, you know, for kids. So you coach, and in T-ball, you go around the city, and you see this kid who's an absolute incredible all-star. They're just like, you know, one of these incredibly gifted athletes. Then you go back to the same park in the not-so-affluent part of town, and you don't see that kid on the team anymore. And then you go back as kids get a little older, and they don't have a baseball program anymore. And the disproportionality on out-of-school activities, with all the great work, and man, there's so much great work in this town on that, but still, the disproportionality is really shocking. I really like our park superintendent, Al Bangora, and he's done a great thing. He started these things called Spark Centers in the different parks. He was a black kid growing up in Milwaukee, and he went down to a park, and they had a computer there, and that's why he got to work at Target, and that's why he went into the park system. And so he's creating these Spark Academies, and they're just wonderful. So if a kid likes art or computers or something, they don't have to like baseball, but they go to the park and they get an equal chance to be their full self.
And that we can help with. I like that. I think that it really, yeah, it's our children. It's, you know, I think Al Gallman used to say, because I used to say, Minneapolis public schools are great. He would say he was the pastor at Fellowship, but also on, and so he would say, oh, South Minneapolis, just don't even talk to me about South Minneapolis. Talk to me about North Minneapolis, then tell me what the school district looks like. So that's part of what I asked. Okay, let's ask a little bit of a not, you know, little less intense question. Would you rather meet your great-great-grandchild or your great-great-grandparent?
Oh, well, that's really simple. My great-great-grandparent was actually pretty interesting. He was a gold miner and was the mayor of Goldfield, Nevada, and must have been a very interesting character. But I mean, my great-great-grandchild, I would love to do that. That would be really, really great. Yeah, no, that's simple.
That's simple. Good.
Yeah.
Good. That it was there.
I love
so
that
question.
All right, well, let's just poll the audience. Okay, you know the question? Okay, raise your hand if you'd rather meet your great-great-grandfather, grandparent, let's say. Okay, great-great-grandchild. Okay, yeah, I'm with you, yeah.
But some people don't have children, so that's but a great.
Yes.
Okay. So what question haven't we asked that you wanted us to ask? Oh, well, there was a few people that have a question, but everyone can ask the question and not any too much before
This
that.
is your rabbi.
So that we can get
Oprah.
more people. If we're going to go out into the community, we got.
Everybody gets a car.
What about anti-Semitism in the city?
Yeah, what about anti-Semitism in the city? I think anti-Semitism has always been a huge issue in this city. It was the most anti-Semitic city in the country. I think there are real issues with anti-Semitism. We, a few years back, launched something. There were, at a horrible moment of time, there were both attacks on synagogues and attacks on mosques. And we put up a fund called the Faith in Each Other Fund. And it was really quite interesting because many of our fund holders of Jewish faith wanted to give to the other one and vice versa. That was a wonderful sign of that. But I do also know that we have been asked to do funding for security. I look outside and know what we're up against here. And so I'm not going to give any sort of cute, rosy little thing about that. I do think there are all sorts of international issues that are coming into play, and I am not going to be able to solve that sitting here today. But I think we have to look coldly in the mirror at how we look at each other and the fear-based scenarios that we have that have created this. And I do think the one positive thing I can say is you happen to have a rabbi who has been a shining star in taking the faith of this place and bringing it out into the community, and that is the very best that's true. And it is incredibly meaningfully important.
Yeah, it's.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here also. It's interesting. I did have a question, and you answered it when you first started your remarks about how politics have changed. Politicians have changed since you've been in office, but you answered that. I have another question. I'm sorry, it's going to be a little intense, maybe, back to that. But so you touched on all the hot buttons. You touched on crime, you touched on education, hunger, drug addiction, and all of that. What is your feeling about accountability? So it's a complicated, Minneapolis is a large city, a lot of complicated things going on. Is there enough accountability, or should there be more?
I think there's a huge accountability gap in our civic and public sectors. It is primarily about what happens when we look in the mirror in the morning. The situation we are in right now there are a whole lot of factors for, but one of the biggest is that people are not engaged in the basic civic work we need to do to find common ground, to talk to someone else, to assume that some sort of leader is going to solve everything for us. We need all those things. But what we really need is for people to recognize, and especially in this city, this civic place, this people place, not a political town as much, we have the capacity to heal our community one person at a time. And too often we are looking for this macro thing. Who are we going to hold accountable is a great question. And, there's some people who should be held accountable for public safety and traffic control and all of that. But the biggest thing is we have to hold ourselves accountable to do something, to find somebody different than us, to find common ground, to challenge someone who is projecting hate. And I think we've become we think of civic world as a spectator sport. It's not. It's hardball, and it's waging peace. Peace is not a passive endeavor, and we all have an opportunity to do something on that. And until I think we collectively recognize that, I will not be able to go to any more dinner parties. And I say that because when so much, people will often say to me, well, what's going to happen with this, or who's going to do this or this? I get it. But the real thing is look in the mirror and step up and figure out what we can do. And we happen to live in a community where we have the capacity to make a difference without a title. And that's easy for me to say because I've had one, but I also know what it's like when I didn't. And I spend a lot of time with people who have no card to enter the room, and they shove their way in there and make a difference. So I know there are many people like that in this room, and I guess I'm asking you to do more. But tell others to stop looking for someone to save them and be the person who makes that change.
Well, I heard about R.T. Ryback when Frank Hornstein took our 3 small children to the airport in pajamas because the airport was letting flights in at all hours of the night, and it was keeping up all the little kids in the neighborhoods that we live in. And I think that was fully orchestrated by you. So he is walking his walk when he says, don't look in the mirror and figure it out and get kids to the airport in pajamas at night, saying you're keeping us up, we're going to come here. And they had a great time, but also made a point. So thank you. We are having to conclude. We so appreciate you coming here on Yom Kippur and having a conversation as always. And there will be projects for you to do. I am sure of it. I'm very excited. So thank you. And everyone else, we appreciate that you are here. And let's...
Can I thank you? Thank you, folks. Yeah.
It's really fun.
All over the map.
So 3:45, we are going to convene back here for afternoon service, or you can go downstairs for a meditation.